Good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about how React has gone increasingly popular and how you can leverage React in your next web application. So over the past few years, React has gone increasingly popular, even massively popular. So a large percentage of web developers currently using React, for example. And this is further confirmed by various metrics. So let's have a look at some of these. So MDN, the Mozilla Developer Network, did a survey across developers and designers with over 28,000 responses. And 72% of those responses refer back to using React, Vue, or Angular, all using a UI framework, so to say. Furthermore, React is being used by over 350,000 websites on the internet right now. This is based on HTTP archive data. However, building React applications is still incredibly hard. Like, saying I'm going to use React is just not enough to get started. Like, you have to set up build tooling. There's a lot of pitfalls that you have to consider that could make your application slow, for example, or have like performance issues. And you need to ensure that your project can actually scale to like massive amounts of pages, for example. And you don't want to rewrite your applications every other month based on like some new APIs or other changes coming along. And you basically just want to focus on building features. Maybe like you like to rewrite everything every other month, but probably your customer or manager still wants you to like build a really solid application that doesn't change very often. In reality, this has gotten a lot easier. Over the last 2 years, there have been a bunch of tools that came out that help you basically improve the experience of building React applications. And these are frameworks built on top of UI libraries like React. And the main goal of this class of framework is user experience and developer experience. So basically building fast websites and web applications for the end user while giving you a great time building those applications. So it's finding the sweet spot between those user experience and developer experience. And like one of the main goals is to make your team more productive in creating features and deploying them to production. So you basically combine great UX with amazing developer experience. The Google Chrome team, calls this framework a web framework. And a web framework is basically an opinionated system with a lot of default tooling and opinions about those. And those are mainly focused on like enabling developers to be more productive and maintain high quality production applications. So it's an end-to-end system that controls every aspect from getting started to everyday development to deployment, for example. And it's positioned directly to impact developer experience and user experience by controlling both the server and the client and the bundling and build process and development and production processes. So it enables developers to build successful, high-quality production web apps. And also web frameworks are positioned to inform performance. So in addition to developer productivity, a web framework is also positioned to directly impact performance of end users. So it has opinions about like server-side rendering or pre-rendering, flushing HTML chunks, streaming, but also it controls how we serve JavaScript, CSS, data, and images. And it also unlocks a bunch of extra features by having this control, like progressive delivery and lazy fetching. So why would you use a web framework? To build a full web application, today you have to know about a bunch of stuff. Like you have to know about UI component model, routing, data flow through your application, compilation and bundling, of course, but also like how to pre-render your application into HTML, and how to like scale your CSS, and how to deploy that all to production, for example. So it's not just scaling in application size or users, but also in how your team can manage the application. So it's all about scaling your team to be able to basically build really solid web applications. When rolling your own solution, you have to like keep in mind all these different parts that come together and have to play well together. So this is where Next.js comes in. And Next.js is the React framework. So it helps you build React applications, and it's a web framework for React. So it allows your team to focus on your product instead of the build tooling. So it comes with a bunch of opinions by default. And these opinions are there to put your team into the pit of success of building web applications and great experiences for your users. So today I'm going to be focusing on a bunch of topics based on web frameworks, but not all of them because I just don't have the time. So we're just going to cover a bit of these. So let's start with the UI component model. So when you choose React, you already choose your component model, right? Like you built your React components, and those are the component model. And these allow you to like not have like 10 versions of the same button and like, for example, multiple grid systems and that kind of thing. So generally this is handled by the UI rendering layer, like React, for example. So next you use React. Then there is routing. So if you build a web application, you've probably done this a bunch of times before, but you generally just start out with a few pages, but it basically grows exponentially after that. Like new features have to be introduced, new pages have to be added, new types of pages have to be added, and that kind of thing. So like basically you might start out with a marketing site or a blog, for example, but like later on you would add in a dashboard or other functionality, like e-commerce functionality, for example. So routing influences more than you might think. For example, your code base needs to be structured in a way that you can express what routes are. So how do you link to a route, for example? And do you want to do client-side transitions or not, for example? Routing affects bundling too, because you don't want to send the whole world, like basically your whole application, to everyone that accesses your website. Like say they go to the about page. You don't want to send like the rest of all your routes in that first response. So routing influences the end user experience also, because if a user clicks a link, they expect it to be really fast, and you don't want to send the rest of your application when that link is clicked, for example. So let's have a look at how it affects the code base. So in Next, you basically start with a pages directory, and in that pages directory, you put files, and those files automatically become routes. So if you create pages about.js, it automatically maps to /about. You can even do dynamic route segments like blog, slug, based in brackets, basically, to move them to /blog /hello world. So it matches anything after the /blog route. And it's automatic based on the file system, as you can see. So like you don't have to think about like where your routes are. They're always in the pages directory. And you can always find like which route matches what. And what does a page look like? A page is just the normal React component. So you export a React component and that automatically becomes a route. And this also affects code splitting. So basically every route or every page is code split by default. So every separate page becomes a separate JavaScript bundle, and they don't affect each other. So if you would grow the size of like your about page, for example, or you import a very heavy dependency, you don't affect other pages in your website or web app. So this avoids that pitfall that I talked about, where you send like the whole application when you access the homepage, for example. And teams can work independently because of this. So they don't affect each other's performance, for example. So then there's linking between pages. So in Next, you can use a link component to link to another page, and that is a client-side route transition. And based on the usage of the link, it can also be prefetched when in the viewport. So that means that it preloads the JavaScript bundle when you basically scroll into view a link, for example. So this only is enabled in fast connections. So like if you have a 4G connection, you can preload those links. But if you are on like a 2G or 3G connection, which is a lot slower to download files, for example, it will disable it automatically. Also, if you have low JS mode enabled, it does the same. It doesn't prefetch. So then there's pre-rendering HTML. So why would you pre-render your HTML or like your React app, basically? Because you can do client-side rendering, right? So one of the main benefits of pre-rendering your HTML, so like rendering your React 3 to HTML at build time or runtime, is SEO. So basically, like search engines can be are able to index your application way faster, and it allows them to also like display meta tags. Like for example, Twitter and Facebook use these open graph meta tags to basically show you this preview. Like in this case, I took a card from Vercel.com, and it just shows you the like OG image, but also the title and the description, which isn't possible if you do client-side rendering only. It also affects how fast content is displayed when a page is accessed. So I have an example of this, which is the Chrome team did a thorough investigation into this, and they came up with this video to basically show you the difference. So if you look at the one side is the React app with pre-rendering, and the other side is the React app without pre-rendering. And as you can see, it takes significantly longer for something to be displayed if it's not pre-rendered. So if you don't send that pre-rendered HTML, CSS to the client side as fast as possible. So pre-rendering comes in a bunch of flavors, like I said. Like you can generate HTML at build time. This is called static site generation. Or you can do it at runtime, which is called server-side rendering. So the main benefit of static site generation is that you can serve the HTML from a CDN as close to your user as possible. And one other benefit is that the JavaScript and the data can be prefetched because it's been generated at build time. So we always know that we can access it in a fast way. One of the benefits of server-side rendering, however, is that it's on demand. So if you have like highly dynamic data, it can be shown for every user that accesses it immediately. So let's dive into static generation. So static generation works at build time, like I said, and it can be served from a CDN. However, you can opt into these in Next through exporting a simple method called getStaticProps. So if you export getStaticProps, it automatically makes that page static by, like, basically if you do like data fetching, and the data fetching is done at build time, and it will render that page to HTML at build time automatically if you opt into to that page through getStaticProps. And you can also pre-render dynamic routes. Like I talked about dynamic routes like blog/hello world, for example, and you can pre-render those with getStaticPaths together with getStaticProps. So if you use getStaticProps, you can actually fetch the data for that one route. But getStaticPaths allows you to send back like the whole list of routes that have to be pre-rendered at build time. And next, there's something built in called preview mode. So preview mode allows you to show updated content to editors. Like if you have a CMS, for example, headless CMS, and the user is editing something in that CMS, you might want to show like what the page is going to look like if they make that change to the website without actually making the change to the website. And this works with any data source. So you can use like a database, but also like headless CMS, like I said. And I have a demo of this, so let's have a look at this. So if you look at this is a static website, and the static website can be edited by anyone in the world. So if you look at this demo, you basically see that like this is statically rendered. It is always a cache hit from a CDN. However, you can start editing any content on this page. So you can say like, "Hello, this is Tim," and then I might want to send this to like someone else in the company that doesn't know like what I want to change per se, and show them a preview of this change. So let's share this preview right now. So I'll take this URL and I'll open an incognito window to show you that like this is not tied to like being logged in or anything. So if you look at that and you go there, you basically access next preview.now.sh, but it enables preview mode for you. So this sets a cookie in the background, and it bypasses the statically generated content that was generated at build time, and shows you the new changed content immediately on the website itself. So here we can see that it's now saying, "Hello, this is Tim." However, if we go back to that other route, so if I go back and I access this page again, you'll see that it still says my static site, because this is still a preview. So like someone has to approve this, basically like, "Hey Tim, this change is great. Let's like change the whole website to hello, this is Tim." And then they can approve that and send it to the like published state inside of your CMS, and that would actually show it on that page that I was showing. So this like next preview.now.sh would then show hello, this is Tim for everyone. So let's go back and look at like how that content changes work, because like I was saying, like if you send a like change inside of your CMS, you want to have that updated, right? So this is what incremental generation helps you with. So like if you build at build time, like you basically build all the pages, like the static pages, and those would be like statically generated at build time, but they still need to change at some point, right? Like you might make a change inside of your headless CMS, and that might affect like certain pages that have to be re-rendered. So Next has incremental generation built in by default. So like one example of this is, how can I render like, I don't know, 1 million pages in like statically across the world? So we made an example for this, which is called static tweet.now.sh, and this basically shows you like how we can pre-render like millions of pages on demand. Like what if a new blog post is published inside of your CMS? Tweets are being published all the time, right? So this is an example of how we can pre-render all the tweets in the world, sort of like 500 million new changes per day, with incremental generation through the fallback mode that get static paths has. So if you look at this link, like let's get a random link, a random tweet. So this is a totally random tweet, and I don't know what it's going to show. Amazing music that you can listen to when programming, but this is a static page. Like you saw how fast it transitioned. So if I now like access it again, it's just really fast always. This is because it's completely static. So if we look at the HTTP headers, for example, and you go into the network tab, and you refresh, you'll see that if you take out the filtering and then go to doc, it will show you that the cache hit was always there. So if you access this on demand, like if I go to another tweet and I access it again, so get a random tweet and go there. So this is someone that built a gallery for themselves, and then look at this new newly accessed HTML, a newly generated HTML file, you'll see that it's still showing that the cache was a hit. So the reason for this is that Next can generate pages statically on demand. And the way that this works is through enabling the fallback true behavior. So the way that this works is, if you look at the getStaticPaths method, that returns just some paths, like 2 paths, for example. And then if you enable fallback true, it basically means that all the other paths that are being accessed can be generated on demand when they are accessed. And while that generation happens, like the first request, it will show a fallback, as you can see in writer.isFallback inside the homepage component. So that says loading tweet, or loading content in this case. And while it is being, like after that is shown, the data is fetched from the server and generated on demand, and then replaced after that. And this only happens for the first request. Like any request after that will be like the statically generated content for that page. And then there is like, if you need to do more updates, like what if you want to change a page, like you make any edit inside of your CMS, you can actually use incremental regeneration. So what does this mean? In getStaticProps, you pass a revalidate parameter, and that can be like any timestamp, so like 1 second in this case, and that can then basically, like in the background, Next will re-render the statically generated page when a request comes in and that timeout has been exceeded. So this is currently available in beta and works automatically on Vercel.com, and you can try it out today, prefixing it by unstable_. And by doing this, you basically allow your site to become statically generated, even if it has like highly dynamic data, because your content can always be like 1 second delayed. Because like if you're going through like the CMS route, for example, like you don't want to render every page that you have in your application for every customer that comes in. Because that content is not going to change every second, at least. Only if you have like highly dynamic data, then you can use server-side rendering on demand. So to do server-side rendering on demand, and this is only like very useful if you have like highly dynamic data, like dashboards, for example, you can use getServerSideProps. And getServerSideProps allows you to return properties also and fetch data from anywhere. The only difference with getStaticProps is that it runs on demand and runs every time you go to that page. So it's on demand for every user. One property of these new data fetching methods is that they allow for direct database queries. So when I say direct database queries, this doesn't mean that you don't need an API anymore. But for your use case, you might want to like do a data SQL query, for example, or use Prisma 2 or other data fetching solutions that only work server side in order to generate some like HTML or content that you want to show to your users, like a markdown processor or other things. So a demo of this is that the code is eliminated from the browser bundle only. So if you look at this, there is a MySQL query going on here, and that accesses the cookies from the user first, and then it basically like fetches a user ID. And as you can see, it's using getServerSideProps. So if you look at the right-hand side, you actually see what the browser bundle would look like. So this is the code that you wrote, and this is what the browser bundle would look like. And obviously, as you can see, server-side-props or getStaticProps are not there. And this is done intentionally because Next will automatically fetch those properties when you do client-side navigation or when you access the page or when it's pre-rendering. So you don't have to like worry about this, but you can actually like use file system modules. You can use like any node module that you could think of inside of getServerSideProps or getStaticProps, and do like fetch data from anywhere really in a highly performant way. And this also means that you ship less code to your users. Like if you do a markdown processing thing inside of getStaticProps, that is not sent to your end user. It's only being used at build time in that case. In case of getServerSideProps, it would be running every request that comes in, but it would still not be sent to the user. So it would still not send as much JavaScript as you would do generally. So this is how you can basically like build applications using like Prisma 2, for example, to do database queries inside of your React code almost. Like the only thing you have to do is export a separate data fetching method, and then it all works. And one thing about these new data fetching methods is that these strategies can be combined. So it means that like pages index could be static using getStaticProps. About.js could be static automatically, because like if you don't export any of this specific data fetching methods, it will be static by default automatically. And like blog slug could be static with getStaticProps and getStaticPaths. And then the dashboard could be server-side rendered through getServerSideProps, for example. So all of these can be combined into one application, allowing you to build truly hybrid applications, which is generally what you do anyway. But generally, like this trade-off you make like when you start building your application instead of like when you are building a new page. So you would either choose like, I'm going to do static generation, so everything is going to be static, or I'm going to do server-side rendering, so everything is server-side rendered. So Next allows you to basically choose between all these like separate data fetching methods and separate rendering strategies based on your page that you're building, which allows you to have super good trade-offs, basically. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is how we're working with the Chrome team on some new and improved features inside of Next. So last year at Chrome Dev Summit, we announced that the Next team is collaborating with the Google Chrome team, and that the Chrome team is investing resources into building out Next.js and improving performance for React applications. Something that we're also doing is we're working with the React team at Facebook to bring some developer experience improvements that are being used internally at Facebook into the open source framework world. So here's a bunch of new features that we're working on that are coming soon to Next. So the first one I wanted to talk about is modern JavaScript. So Next is built on top of Babel and Webpack. And setting up Babel and Webpack is like taking care of you for you automatically. However, there is still a bunch of improvements that we can do on top of this. And the first one is modern JavaScript. So let's walk through how Next does compilation today. So if you have pages about, pages blog, and pages pricing, for example, the first thing that happens is we pass them through Webpack, and Webpack will call Babel, and Babel will call our next Babel preset. So this is a preset that includes like a bunch of performant defaults for React applications. Then the code is minified by Cursor, and then we do a bunch of chunking optimizations. And we worked with the Google Chrome team to massively improve these chunking optimizations recently. These are available if you install the latest version of Next.js or Next.js 9.2 plus, basically. So what this outputs is like all the pages, so like about, blog, pricing, etc., because they're all code split, but also a library framework chunk, and then shared chunks for, like, say about and blog use the same JavaScript libraries. They would be separated out so that it's not downloaded between those routes if you navigate between them. So the way that this ties into modern JavaScript is that we're actually going to include extra compilation for modern browsers versus legacy browsers. So this means that we're going to use the module no module pattern to load only modern JavaScript inside of newer browsers, and send like these legacy browsers a like polyfill bundle, basically, that includes like all these helpers. It's ES5. While the modern browsers get like async await, arrow functions, and classes, which reduces the output of JavaScript. And this will be available in the next few months. Like, we're still working on it, but it's getting close to being released. Then there is fast refresh. So you might not have heard of React fast refresh, but it basically is the like next iteration of React hot loader, which is this hot module replacement API that allows you to preserve state when you make changes to your code. And this was generally like not super reliable, but it was recently introduced inside of React and is a first-class API now. And we're integrating this into Next automatically. So if you, let's just walk through a video of how this works. So if you look at the video, you basically see that there's a click me button that basically increases the number of, every time you click on it. So every time you click on the button, you see a like the number go up. But while we make changes to this page, you still see that the number is preserved, like the number of clicks is preserved. And this means that you can make any changes, like if you were to like have a modal open, for example, and it's based on state, that will be preserved. So you can actually like do the styling, do all the like React changes, like change the components, change the like JSX, but still preserve that modal being open. So you don't have to click it open anymore every time you make a change. On top of that, React Fast Refresh also allows us to build a better error overlay. So we're redesigning the error overlay to match Facebook's internal error overlay, but also it's going to integrate deeply with React Fast Refresh, which allows us to provide better stack traces, provide better component traces also. So one example of this is like on the left-hand side, you see the previous error overlay, and on the right-hand side, you see the new error overlay. And it's much more accurate and it captures your intention better. So another thing is that we're also changing the compilation failure overlay, which looks kind of the same, but it's actually not the same. Because compilation errors mean that the page is always going to crash. So it blurs out the background of the page and shows you very directly, like, this is wrong with your JSX, like you made a typo, for example. And this is something that we're still working on, but it's going to be released very soon. Then there is improved environment support. So one of the main bunch of feedback that we got from users was that it's really hard to use environment variables inside of Next, but also like they want to load their environment variables through .env. So we're introducing .env support with an automatic prefix. If you use Next public, they will be like globally accessed. So one of the main pieces of feedback that we got was that we don't know if this like variable is going to be sent to the browser or inlined inside of your JavaScript bundle. And this is going to be taken care of automatically if you use Next public _. However, if you don't use that, it's not going to be inlined in the bundle. So it's very consistent, and you don't have to worry about like, oh, I'm going to leak my environment variables to the browser, for example. Then there's rewrites. So one of the things that you might want to do is rewrite a route to like some other URL or even like another route inside of your application. So rewrites allows you to do this, and it allows you to fetch like the list of rewrites from another place also, because it's an asynchronous method. On top of rewrites, you might want to do redirects also. So a redirect, for example, is like I want to do like move /category/old category to /category/new category. And this allows you to do that through setting just the source and the destination, and then permanent true or false. So you don't have to think about like status codes or anything, because that is all taken care of automatically. But if you want to set a status code, that's still possible also. Then there's absolute import. So one of the things that you might want to do in your application is like use absolute import. So what does this mean? Like you might want to not use like relative paths that are very like deeply nested, but instead like import component slash button based on like the root of your project. And BaseURL inside of tsconfig or jsconfig allows you to do this. And it's currently already shipped inside of Next.js, so if you install the latest version, you can use this already. On top of absolute imports, another feature that TypeScript or the JS file has is that it allows you to do module aliases. So module aliases are sort of like BaseURL, but you can actually do a alias to another route. So like, say you say import at my namespace /star or /button, it will move that to /components /button automatically. So you can configure like a lot of different namespaces for this kind of feature. Then there is basePath support. So one of the like most requested Next.js features to date, I think, is that you can't easily host a Next app on a subpod of your domain. So like if you want to incrementally adopt the like Next.js framework inside of your like subpod of your website, so say like example.com/docs, you can't do that easily through, like you have to prefix a bunch of like links and that kind of thing. But we're introducing a basePath option that allows you to do this automatically. So you can say basePath/docs and like /docs will automatically become the root of your project. So you don't have to prefix URLs anymore, and you don't have to do like anything other than configure this. Then there is the Eslint integration. So we're going to integrate Eslint inside of Next. And this allows us to show you like warnings from Eslint automatically in development, but also provide a preset that catches common performance pitfalls. So we're going to like detect if you inject synchronous scripts that block the rendering, and a bunch of other tests that we can do at build time or during development automatically. Then there is something that might seem like super simple, but is really useful if you are using a REST API or some kind of API, which is that fetch is going to be polyfilled by default. Like you no longer have to import isomorphic unfetch or any other library to make it work. And it's going to be available in the browser and in Node.js, and it will be automatically polyfilled, so you don't have to import anything. And then, last but not least, is React Concurrent mode. So we're currently integrating React Concurrent mode inside of Next. You'll be able to opt into React Concurrent mode once it's ready. However, if you want to start make your application compatible with concurrent mode today, you can enable React Strict mode, which shows you all the warnings and like how to change your components to make them concurrent mode compatible for the most part. So Next.js is being built by Vercel, which you might not know about, but it's a hosting platform or cloud platform by the creators of Next.js. And you can use Vercel to host your Next.js app very easily and like basically get pull request staging environments, show you like preview deployments, like basically like you can show any like anyone in your company, like these are the changes that I'm making to my Next step in a very easy way through Vercel. So surely check that out. And if you want to learn Next.js, you can go to nextjs.org/learn to start learning Next.js and read more about all these different features, but also how to get started. And it walks you through like all the different features that Next has. Thank you very much for your time, and have a good day.
So I do have a question that came up that I'm going to paste an example path into the chat here and ask Tim the question. So I'm not sure if that's very easy to see that, but
yeah.
Since the pages and API directories map directly to URLs, how does one deal with long paths? Right now, one has to create a lot of nested folders. It makes the relative paths when importing components and services from outside the pages directory very long. It also feels a bit weird, personal preferences, he says, to have the file system control the API routes. Is there a different way to go about this?
Yeah, so the nesting is just something like that you have to do because otherwise you can't like create nested routes, right? The basically like the importing, like the basically dot slash spaghetti is mostly covered by this new feature that I just talked about in the talk, which is absolute import. So that allows you to basically configure that like this is the root of my project, and then you can import like anything relatively from the root of your project. So you can like import components / button and that kind of stuff. So that kind of helps there. About API routes, like you don't have to use API routes, right? Like you can like we see lots of Next users also like have a separate API. That is just like not built inside of Next. But if you do want to leverage API routes, like they work pretty great when you're like building a full stack app or like handling like form submissions or that kind of thing.
Okay, and that question was from Vernac2539. Thank you very much. Another question for Tim. Is it possible to include tests in a Next project structure and components or pages folder in particular, or a pages folder in particular?
So right now we have this convention where basically you have to have like only pages inside of your pages directory. We're continuously evaluating if that is like still the right way to go, but right now that is like a pretty good standard that we have. Yeah, so and then like basically what we do for our own apps is that we like separate everything out of the pages directory. So like tests are like outside of the pages directory, but also like components, for example, and then we import them like accordingly.
And can you just wrap that question up in a very, very short, just reiterate it, because I think we had a little bit of issue with audio cut out there. Sorry, just kind of condense it down into one more final answer, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. I guess I'm still cutting out, but my internet connection is very terrible. I live in the countryside of the Netherlands. So the pages directory is like currently only for pages, but we're always evaluating if that's still like the right way to go. Right now it still is. We had lots and lots and lots of discussion about this because like a lot of people want to configure it or like change it or something like that. But it has a lot of downsides also in terms of like optimizations that we can do. But yeah, so like what we do for our own apps is we separate everything out, and then like the pages directory is just pages inside of the app.
Okay. Another question from the YouTube. Are there any plans for Next.js to handle internationalization natively without using Next I18 Next? Next-I18 Next?
Yes. So we're currently evaluating if we can provide a really good solution for internationalization built in, so that we can basically like do the heavy lifting of like all the setup that you have to do to get internationalization going. But also like internationalization is super broad, so we're talking to a lot of companies that either have done really well at the translation, like Stripe, for example, or are like currently trying to adopt like multiple languages in their apps. So we're still like doing all the research for that so that we can provide like the right solution for it. But it's definitely something that's coming in like the next few months or so.
Sean, do you want to take any of these questions, or do you have any in particular?
I was going to actually ask the internationalization one. There's another one, right? Okay.
That will be the last question.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, if you're only using static pages in your next app, is it possible to use static hosting for your app, e.g. S3, or is it always required to run the build on the server? I think that's an easy one for you.
Yeah. Yes and no. You can do fully static export, which exports HTML files. Like that's the only thing you get out of there. And like JavaScript, right? That runs on the client side. But if you want to leverage all the new features that we're building inside of Next, you either have to use like build an integrated platform yourself, or use Vercel, for example. And the other way to go about that is obviously using still like booting up a server, but then the statically generated content can still be like updated through like the fallback option that it talks about, and also incremental generation.
Thanks so much for a great framework and a great talk.
Thanks, Dan. It was awesome.